Turkey, Kurdistan, oil. That's the motion. Have you seen how ranking is? Can I get it out of Turkey oil? Right? Who's that? Yes, yes.
Yeah, sure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the quarterfinals of NTU UADC 2014. In government, we have Carlo, Jason, and Victor representing Zambia. In opposition, we have Sadiq, Amira, and Mubarak representing IIUM. My name is Rohan, and with me is Benny, Ghana, Aditya Shetty, and Amni Jan. May I request all of you to turn your phones on silent, to keep decorum. Please do not cheer louder than that is required. Please do not leave the room in between speeches. Without further ado, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister. Yeah.
The Turkish government has systematically oppressed the Kurds within Turkey, ladies and gentlemen, driving them away within the Turkish society and into Kurdistan, ladies and gentlemen, near Iraq. And that Turkey has spent $10 billion annually to actually purge, ladies and gentlemen, the Kurds within society and to unilaterally enter Kurdistan, wherein they actually extract oil. That in spite of their persecution of the Kurds, they still have the audacity to enter the land owned by the Kurds and extract oil from them, wherein the very resources owned by their people are not translated to their any benefits, but are funneled back to the very institution that has actually oppressed them. But more importantly, that they have not actually seek the consent of 3 claimant parties over Kurdistan, ladies and gentlemen, given the fact that the Kurdistan is actually claimed by Iran, Iraq, and Turkey, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we highly condemn the unilateral action sit down of Turkey invading Turkestan. The same way that the international community condemns the unilateral action of China extracting oil within disputed territories in Vietnam and the Philippines, ladies and gentlemen. We also condemn them the same way. That's why, coming from government bench, we have 2 things that we want to achieve by condemning them. First is, 1, we do not want to actually destroy the stability within the region, given the fact that the subject matter is so sensitive to 3 claimant states, and that is oil, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, which paradigm do we best protect the interests of the Kurds? And we think it's only when the only government that accepted the Kurds when they're persecuted, it is only Iraq that can ensure that the Kurds can also have their take in the economic development. Before,
if it's really true Turkey oppresses them, why did the Kurdish political party give up weapons in its fight?
Huh? That's not true, because currently right now they're still actually funneling funds, ladies and gentlemen, $10 billion annually to fight the Kurds. The first question I want to ask is why this is something that must be condemned. Is firstly that the will of the Kurdish people are not heard within the entire process. Because in oil extraction, in any oil extraction, it always entails one, displacement of people within established society. That is the same thing that is currently happening right now. That when the Turkish government entered Kurdistan, they displaced thousands of Kurds, ladies and gentlemen, that are living on areas where oil are actually present, ladies and gentlemen. And what is more disgusting is that this particular land is owned by them culturally, ladies and gentlemen, and that you do not see any translation of economic benefits to the Kurdish people. In fact, oils that are actually extracted within Kurdistan are even being used by the very Turkish government to fund the war against the Kurds, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. So one, you don't see any benefits being translated to the Kurdish people, given the fact that the very institution that monopolizes control over the oil is the same institution that has been oppressing them. Secondly, we think that why do we need the consent of the Iraqi federal government? Why should there be in the table and not only the Kurdish people? Why shouldn't this be only a transaction between the Kurdish people in Kurdistan and Turkey? First is we need an institution that is equally powerful, that can protect the voice, ladies and gentlemen, of the Kurdish people between the negotiations between the Turkish government and any parties within that region. What is the point? Because only 18% of Kurds are actually living within Turkish society. But more than that, Kurdistan, firstly, does not have the same rhetorical capital as the Iraqi government. They don't even have their own military. They don't even have a huge economic activities that can match that of Iraq and resources. What is the point? You need an institution that protects the Kurdish people within this matter. And why is it Iraq that is legitimate, ladies and gentlemen? Because when the Kurdish people were being purged within Turkey, it was only Iraq that allowed the Kurdish people to actually reside in Kurdistan. Yes, I am serious. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, the very reason why the Iraqi government is the only one. Because in times when the Kurdish people were being persecuted, it was only Iraq that allowed them to enter Iraq and take refuge, ladies and gentlemen. You even have Kurdish within the parliament of Iraq, ladies and gentlemen, where you can ensure equal protection of Kurdish interests and Iraqi interests. What is the point, ladies and gentlemen? If we have an institution that truly cares for the Kurdish people, that is when the voice of the Kurdish people can be heard. That if there are, for example, the Iraqi government has a joint venture with Turkey, ladies and gentlemen, over oil extraction, that is when we can have at least a little bit an assurance that benefits, resources, finances that are being extracted from that land are being invested and used for the welfare of the Kurdish people, investments, infrastructures within Kurdistan, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. Now, the third idea, why we think we must condemn this particular action is this. We think that Turkey has not exhausted all efforts to be able to enter Kurdistan and extract resources. Why so? Because in other instances, you saw China, who had joint ventures over natural resource extraction with Malaysia, with Japan, ladies and gentlemen, over disputed territories, ladies and gentlemen, because that is the only compromise that you can make, right? Instead of having a stalemate over that land where resources can neither be used by both parties, then compromise and have a joint venture. The same way that China and Japan did, ladies and gentlemen, in the past, and also with Malaysia. Now, we think that in terms of instability within the region, this is very dangerous, right? Given the fact that the subject matter is so sensitive. This is oil, for God's sake, the cash cow of any Middle Eastern country, ladies and gentlemen. Why so? Because in any move before in the past within the region, anything that has any unilateral action towards oil extraction, disrespecting the sovereignty of another nation, it always turned out to be bloody, ladies and gentlemen. It always entered into conflicts, the same way that Libya, Syria, and Iran, ladies and gentlemen, had conflicts in the past over oil extraction. We think the same case, ladies and gentlemen, is what we do not want to happen if you unilaterally disrespect the sovereignty of 3 other nations that has legitimate claim over these particular areas. So in summation, we defend 3 things. First, we think that the will of the Kurdish people isn't assured to be protected under your model, given the fact that you trust the monopoly of resources to an institution that persecutes them. Secondly, only Iraq is the only institution that can better protect the Kurdish people. But thirdly, we think in terms of keeping stability within the region, this is the same strategy that we need to apply. For all of these reasons, you have to pass the motion.
I thank the Prime Minister, and to begin the case against the motion, I invite the Leader of Opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, Iraq is a country that discriminates the Sunnis, the Kurds. Any minority that does not support the Shia power is either slaughtered or left impoverished. That's the country that government wants to leave the Kurdistan individuals to. That's not something we want. We reject all of the lies that Prime Minister brought to you, and I'll bring to you three substantive arguments. Number one, why is Turkey's help in oil exports necessary? Secondly, why is it in the interest of Turkey to do so? And thirdly, why Iraqis won't be stupid enough to retaliate. Before that, majority of my rebuttals will be integrated within my substantives, but in identifying the lies that Prime Minister brought up to you, I'll be very direct. Because first off, he told us that the Turkish government has never oppressed the Kurdistans. They're angels, they always protect them. Then why the hell have they not been able to facilitate the sort of oil exports that are supposed to happen within Kurdistan? Because they reject the idea that the Kurdistan individuals deserve of having their oil exports, or even when they do export it, the money is hoarded by the Shia majority, by the Shia individuals of Iraq, and is never redistributed back to people on the ground. But second of all, is the very idea that Kurdistan already has 20% of Turkish people. What incentive would the Turkey government have to oppress their very individuals that exist within this particular area, right? But thirdly, is the PM probably didn't read the motion right, because it says that Turkey helps in facilitating the oil exports, meaning that they don't control it, they facilitate, meaning that it came on the request of the Kurdistan individuals who felt that they needed to export their oils. No. But lastly, is the blatant obvious idea of Chemical Ali, which was done under the regime of Saddam Hussein, where the entire Iraqi government wiped out a huge bunch of numbers of Kurdistan individuals. How dare you ignore that and say the Kurdistan individuals were protected and were not discriminated? First argument, why is Turkey's help in oil exports necessary? The idea is this: Kurdistan is an area in Iraq that is made up of a discriminated minority. The Kurds are never listened to, they are alienated. The very fact that there are religious campaigns held up against them by the Shia government, saying that they are not Muslims, they are fake, they are imposters, they are an enemy to our religion, and anybody who associates themselves with Islamism, that's the sort of idea that is propagated by the Iraqi government. The very fact that the politics revolve around ethnicity, it is so popular to discriminate anybody who does not contribute back to the Shia government. Governments always do so, because it's not just about the Kurdistan individuals that are being discriminated. The very example and the behavior that the government has exhibited when they were willing to even exile and force the Sunni vice president into fleeing because they said he was a Sunni, he was probably a part of a terrorist group, he is corrupted, he shouldn't be idolized or supported. These were all the political tactics that individuals who are part of the Iraqi government were willing to adopt to ensure that the Shia governance is always in the picture. No, it's not enough to say oh, maybe the new governance under President Nurin al-Maliki is so angelic that he's moderate, that he's willing to negotiate. That's no, we don't think that happens. In the government that still has old roots of old political sentiments from the Saddam Hussein regime, because there are still old individuals within the new political system, right? Because of the whole political unity that they were willing to agree on when Saddam Hussein's regime toppled down. They didn't want to generally the international community wanted to ensure that there was not much bloodshed on the ground, so they endorsed a political unity agreement, meaning that those old politic sentiments that are highly discriminatory towards the Kurds are still there. Negotiations simply don't work. That's why we don't think that the Turkish people have an incentive to negotiate, given the fact that all other methods have been exhausted out and it's proven in vain. They told us, well, in parliament we have Kurdish these Kurdistan individuals. Well, at best, even if that's true, these individuals are continuously drowned out because listening to their policy is is probably unpopular by the Shia governance. We don't think that's something we want, right? No, the Kurdistan area has oil, but the Iraqi government simply does not export this. How can you give any excuse, identifying the problem that exists within status quo? But secondly, why is it in the interest of Turkey? But before that, yes.
It's already the 4th minute and you're still not responding as to why is it legitimate for Turkey to unilaterally disrespect the sovereign claim of Iran and Iraq over Kurdistan.
I just gave you a 4-minute answer to that because, generally, when a government isn't protecting people on the ground, I would like to think that mandates external help for people to want to ensure salvation and humanity is always protected, regardless of your arbitrary sovereignty principle, right? Secondly, why is it in the interest of Turkey? Because first off, you have to acknowledge that when people are continuously impoverished and are discriminated, these Kurdistan individuals are discriminated and they become refugees that flee into the Turkish territory, right? Turkey already has to deal with the floodgates of having Syrian refugees continuously coming in. It is within their best interest to ensure that they don't have any more refugees from Kurdistan coming into their country. But more importantly, right, we need to understand the context that is especially crucial within Kurdistan. Terrorism back then was something that was highly acknowledged within Kurdistan because they were so impoverished and so antagonized that people started taking up arms and being hostile towards two people, not just Iraq, but as well as Turkey. They were pissed off. Iraq for they were, angry at Iraq for discriminating them, but they were as well as angry at Turkey because number one, they felt that Turkey were neglecting some of their people that were there, but second off was the fact that Turkey is so close to Kurdistan, yet you omitted from helping us and you let people die. How, that's not something that people on the ground were willing to agree to. So what happened then? Everybody came into agreement, right? Iraq, Kurdistan, as well as Turkey. They said, let's come to a peace deal that was made last year, right? Well, the terrorists said, I will give up arms in return for economic empowerment that everybody acknowledges. We think that it's within the mandate of President Erdogan, whereby he needs to keep his deal, even if the Iraqi government refuses to do so. Otherwise, their very own security will be at stake. Why is it that one country refuses to give the rights to their people? Another country should believe that principle as well, just because they don't want to breach sovereignty, especially when you're not talking about an absolute breach of sovereignty while people are coming in with guns. The only thing that Turkey is doing is facilitating the oil exports to ensure that some money reaches the people on the ground. How do you facilitate and ensure that is something we protect? Lastly, why Iraqis won't retaliate, right? Because either they retaliate against Kurdistan or Turkey. In essence, it is an attack against Turkey. No Islamic country is going to be brave enough or stupid enough to want to attack Turkey, given the fact that that Turkey is a power broker within the Islamic world. The very fact they are probably the ones who control votes, sentiments, and any forms of perception within OIC. The point where they do attack Turkey and they disagree with Turkey, all of the other Islamic countries will follow suit in the perception of Turkey, meaning that Iraq will alienate themselves. That's not something they're going to be stupid enough to do. That's why we think it's not about time we listen to the lies that Prime Minister tells you. Discrimination is happening. At best, the least we can do is ensure these people have enough money, enough means to survive from day to day. For all these reasons, I'm proud to oppose.
I thank the Leader of Opposition for her speech. I'd like to remind the audience to not leave the room during speeches and wait until the end of speeches. And without further ado, I'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
The tension with Leader of Opposition's speech is that she tells you that Iraq is such an evil country, always on the go, wanting to kill the Kurdish individuals, but at the same time, she says that Turkey is such a powerful country in the Organization of Islamic Countries that Iraq won't be able to retaliate. The tension in that characterization is that it proves Carlos' argument that Turkey has so much power that even Kurdish individuals on the ground won't be properly represented, even at the expense of a sovereign nation's claim over Kurdistan. But second of all, if Iraq is as powerless in OIC, according to her, then the legitimate claims are something that Turkey can bypass, even at the expense of best interests. There are two questions that we need to answer today. First is who best represents the interests of the Kurdish people, and second of all, something that they never argued on their side: what is the value of consent, especially in an area that is historically sensitive and at this point in time is still a political deadlock coming from them. Let's go on to the first idea, because all my rebuttals will be integrated. Who best represents the interests of the Kurdish people? And this is where opposition falls down, because they never characterize the plight of the Kurdish individuals. What is Kurdistan? And this is something that Carlo already argued. They are a struggling people fighting for collective determination, located in a piece of land that historically has been in question, ladies and gentlemen. So there is a struggle for people fighting for collective determination because they are spread in different countries. In fact, if you're saying that Turkey is as good as you say it is, why, in the longest time, is Turkey not allowing Kurdish individuals to go and have their independent Kurdistan? That's the plight of the PKK in the past that you've obliterated in the 1980s, ladies and gentlemen. What this means, what the example means, is that at this point, we really don't know who represents them, right? But if you look at it, they tell us Kurds have been mistreated. And this is something that we will concede on both sides. They've been mistreated by the Saddam Hussein government, and after the fall, they're properly represented now, but they're also mistreated under your side. You're not responding to the idea that $10 billion have been spent to drive the Kurdish individuals out of Turkey so that they can be culturally assimilated in other nations. And now that you see that there's a value in the oil extraction in those lands, you tell me that the Turkish government is specifically going to be good, ladies and gentlemen. The debate is, does Iraq have an interest at this point in time? And second of all, do the Kurds have a legitimate claim? They've never proven that. All they had was examples of the Turkish government being able to represent their needs. But if you look at it, during the last few Turkish riots, Erdogan was mostly criticized by fourth-generation Kurdish ethnics that his policies are anti-Kurds. You've seen that in the obliteration of the PKK, misrepresentation of the PKK from the 1980s to 2014. So even the peace deal that she was talking about was something that was manipulated by the Turkish government at this point in time. And if you tell me that they're the only government that can best represent them, and you're not arguing why the Turkish party is so powerful in Turkey right now, there's something wrong with that, because obviously the Turkish government is the only person in that negotiation table that can have their way out of them, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this House. But if you look at it, all of their rebuttals against us can be applied to all countries. Saddam persecuted them. Ayatollah Khomeini systematically and culturally assimilated Kurdish individuals. But at this point in time, we think that the way Turkish governments represent the Kurdish individuals also are as legitimate as the Iraqi government's claim to that. So if you say that 43% of Kurdish individuals live in Turkey, you also have a minority of 31% inside Iraq, ladies and gentlemen. The question is, why is the consent of the Iraqi government not allowed at that point in time? They tell us, but there are Kurds in Turkey and Iraq drove them. The same rebuttal applies to them. So obviously the first issue is going to be a matter deadlock because both sides persecuted, both sides were able to get them and absorb them. But on your side, the manipulation and the monopoly of the Turkish government to represent them is what hurts Iraq to support and to represent the Kurdish individuals as well. If you look at the recent policies, ladies and gentlemen, of the Iraqi government, you've seen a change greatly in the way they structure representing. After the fall of the Ba'athist party, ladies and gentlemen, you've had increases of Kurdish individuals being voted into the parliament. You've also seen government funding individuals to culturally marry, like the Sunnis and the Shiites, the Sunnis and the Kurds, the Shiites and the Kurds. So your characterization of Iraq as an absolutely evil country does not lie in the debate. So at this point in time, if nobody can argue who best represents the Kurdish people, the conclusion that we can get is that maybe Turkey can represent them for the Kurdish individuals inside Turkey. But that doesn't argue why Iraq cannot represent the Kurdish individuals inside Kurdistan as well. In fact, if you look at the collective determinism of people there, they want independent Kurdistan as well. So there are a lot of tensions at this point, and we say that the being able to represent also assumes the legitimacy to say no or to say yes to something that involves something as sensitive as oil extraction and facilitation. So you can't put the burden that they're just facilitating. There are already infrastructures there, because that assumes that all of the benefits and the profits will be funneled by the government without consideration to the people that Iraq is also representing at this point. Yes?
Sir, if you agree that the ownership of Kurdistan is so historically debatable, why are you fighting for the absolute rights of Iraq?
No. We're not fighting for the absolute consent of Iraq. We're just saying that in order for us to facilitate extraction, consent from both sides must be there. Now the debate is, where will you get that? And that's the second argument of the debate. What is the value of consent? Because if you look at it, ladies and gentlemen, and we've already proven that Iraq has a sovereign claim, using Amira's characterization, then Iraq already has done that, ladies and gentlemen. We've already said that Iraq is not as evil as they characterize it to be. But what does looking for Iraq's consent do? It means that Turkey will not be able to monopolize the discussion, the extraction, and they will have to engage two things. First, the Kurdish individuals inside Turkey and the Kurdish individuals inside Iraq. But second of all, the Iraq's government claim to that as well. The same way that if you look at it, claimant states of historically questionable territories look at the negotiation table in order for them to get claims that are legitimate from both sides, ladies and gentlemen. So if you tell me that Turkey is so powerful as a power broker in the region, that it can always monopolize the discussion even against Iraq. And Iraq's consideration and Iraq's ability to say no is the only thing that empowers Turkish individuals in Iraq, and that's how you protect them. There are three possible scenarios. If Iraq does say no, and this allows Turkey, at least force Turkey to prove more to Kurdish individuals that they're the best country to represent them. But second of all, it allows Iraq to compete with Turkey's ability to represent Kurdish individuals inside Iraq as well. So this empowers individuals from both sides. But if in their side, Iraq's consent is something that you can just throw away, what's for us not to say that Turkey will not be able to oppress them just because you tell them that I'm the only power broker that's powerful in the region? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please request you all to maintain order during speeches? That said, I thank the Deputy Prime Minister and the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Yeah.
I'm not intentionally trying to delay. I know my Egyptian and Afghanistani friends back there, would really love to bash government case in this debate because of the factual inaccuracies which they've shown. Regardless of that factual debate, I'll give you logical reasons as to why Turkey would have a disincentive to oppress and why Iraq have a massive incentive to oppress even post-intervention. So I'm going to answer three questions in my speech. Firstly, who oppresses the Kurds? Secondly, when can we circumvent sovereignty? And thirdly, how our policy would improve negotiations in the long run and material we shall table. Firstly, who oppresses the Kurds? I'll divide this into two subsections. Firstly, we're going to look at why Turkey would not want to oppress the Kurds. The first reason is because if you do know that the Kurds are directly tied towards the ethnicity which Turkey stands for. That's why 25% of the Kurds, which are within Kurdistan, ladies and gentlemen, are largely tied towards people in Turkey and through familial bonds which exist. The example I point you to is the intervention which was supported by Turkey, the United States coalition, which intervened in Qatar. The reason which Turkey supported the United States coalition in Qatar is not because of the oil exploitation which Iraq did, was also because its people who were Kurds were being oppressed, ladies and gentlemen, through the intervention which happened in Qatar. The second reason
is because there's a large voting bloc which the AKP party is depending itself upon. It is largely disingenuous for this side to say, oh no, like currently the Kurds already are distancing themselves from the AKP party. The reason why Tayyip Erdogan has won majority in almost the past 3 elections is primarily because Erdogan has also won the support and hearts and minds of the minority, which is the Kurds in the country, ladies and gentlemen. I think that's something which is really important for us to contemplate. But the third reason, if it's genuinely true, just ask yourself, is it really true that Turkey has been oppressing the Kurds? Then tell me why the PKK, which was recently known as a terrorist organization, has struck a peace deal with Erdogan itself, ladies and gentlemen. They said, oh, but the peace deal is manipulated by Erdogan. If it is manipulated, then tell me why the number of terrorist attacks have massively declined since the peace deal was struck last year. That's indicative of a negotiation which has worked on the table. Sit down. But keep in mind, right, the other reason why Turkey would have a disincentive to exploit is because if it exploits, a substantial portion of refugees from Kurdistan would flock into Turkey first in contrast to Iraq, because Turkey seems to be more economically viable in contrast to Iraq, which has a legacy of discrimination, oppression, which it has perpetuated. We think that is simply ridiculous. Sit down. So, why would Iraq have an incentive to oppress the Kurds? I don't know why I'm doing this debate, but regardless, this debate must still be a factual debate. Number one, pre-intervention, everyone knows Chemical Ali, which was notorious for wiping out approximately 50,000 Kurds, ladies and gentlemen, in 2001, which led towards the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, to use this as a reason for United States intervention in Iraq. Let's not talk about the conspiracy theory of the nuclear debate, but regardless, it was used by the Secretary of State, ladies and gentlemen. Sit down. So pre-intervention, it was already there. But then the second speaker said, but Iraq has changed. Assuming that Iraq has changed, the sentiments of Kurds on the ground have not, because they've been oppressed, have been killed by the very people who you said would help them. Even if the Iraqi government had genuinely good intention, the Kurds would have a disincentive to affiliate itself with a person which has oppressed the ethnicity for a very long period of time. But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we give you 2 reasons why even the new Iraq would still oppress the Kurds. One, because of the political unity deal which was struck in 2004, ladies and gentlemen. What is this deal? This deal led towards a unity government which was supported by the United States, because the United States did not want to wage war against all groups. It was forced to subsume the remnants of the Saddam regime, ladies and gentlemen. And there's a political reason why they want to do this. Because it is popular in Iraq to suppress the Kurds, primarily because the Kurds are seen to be deviants religiously, and religion is often the reason which gets you into power to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. Even the new Iraq has kicked out the Sunni vice president of the allegations of corruption, ladies and gentlemen. What more, the Kurds, which is a minority times 2, in contrast to Sunnis, which are currently being oppressed in Iraq. Sit down. But more importantly, the reason why Iraq has an incentive to do this, because Iraq does not want Kurdistan to secede, ladies and gentlemen. So this side suddenly want to bring a counterclaim. No. Actually, it's Turkey who does not want Kurdistan to secede. Again, a factual debate here. But why would Iraq does not want this, ladies and gentlemen? Primarily because Iraq wants to maintain its control and oil over that particular place. But more importantly, because Iraq also wants to ensure that it does not allow for any secession movements which happened there to begin with. We posit that it was Turkey who actually supported the secession movement since last year, since the PKK has disarmed. Before they disallowed, because PKK did not want to disarm. Since they've chosen to disarm, that's when they've allowed this to happen. Yeah.
I'm sorry that Iraq is so bad. Will Turkey allow all the Kurdish individuals and absorb them inside Turkey if they're so good?
Unfortunately, Kurds want their own land. The suppression made by the Iraqi government is disallowing that from happening. But it's because of the oppression perpetrated by Iraq, which forced a substantial portion of Kurds to become refugees to run into Iraq, to run into Turkey. You need to deal with that. Second, why is it justified to circumvent sovereignty? This I say you need consent from both parties. Unfortunately, there's one party who simply does not respect the will of the people and basic human rights standards. Oppression has happened on a continuous basis, ladies and gentlemen. Turkey does not want this to happen. Even the president of Turkey, ladies and gentlemen, Abdullah Gül, is a Kurd by ethnicity to begin with. They have an incentive to ensure that this does not happen. The extension of protecting my own citizens, in just the same way how Kenya intervened in Somalia because Kenyans were killed in Somalia, we think Turkey also has a claim to do so because its people are getting butchered and massacred in Kurdistan, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, because it's a breach of security when massive refugees flock into your country because of the perpetration of suppression done by Iraq, it is a legitimate claim for you to intervene. When Iraq fuels desperation of economy, which brings up the PKK, which brings people out of desperation to become terrorists, ladies and gentlemen, they have a claim to do so. Just because, and this is their concern, right? Oh, but Turkey is strong. Just because Turkey is strong does not mean that Turkey is the oppressor. Because Turkey is strong, that means Turkey depends on the global trade. Because Turkey does not only depend on oil, that means it must ensure that it sustains its global standards, ladies and gentlemen, contrary to a country like Iraq, which can look at only one thing. Negotiations. This will create an impetus for Iraq to reach an amicable end. If not, Turkey will circumvent Iraqi laws, and that means Iraq will not get a piece of the pie, which it could have, ladies and gentlemen. Negotiations will only work when Iraq has something to lose and Turkey has the leverage over it. We provide that leverage, ladies and gentlemen, when now Iraq would want to reach an amicable end with Turkey so they can bring some profits back towards Iraq. For all these three reasons, I'm very happy to oppose.
I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition and invite the government.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are three important issues or questions in today's debate. First one is, are we even supposed to ask for Iraq's consent? Because they never proved to us why Turkey has absolute monopoly over how to administer Kurdistan. Second is, how does Iraq really even have a claim over Kurdistan? And lastly is, how do we attain peace in territorial conflict in Kurdistan? On to the first one. How do we best represent the Kurdish people? Because we come from the affirmative bench said we're not saying that Iraq alone should be the only one, but Iraq, along with other countries, for example, who has a claim over that, should even have at least a joint venture, right? So they're never even justified why these joint ventures should not exist to begin with. But more than that, is Iraq absolutely evil? Because they claimed and talked to you about as if Iraq is still living in Saddam Hussein's era, ladies and gentlemen. The genocide which happened against the Kurds, ladies and gentlemen, has been the rhetorical capital, ladies and gentlemen, which the people within Iraq today, or the government, are using so that the same thing would never happen again, so that the dictator just like Saddam Hussein will never ever rise. That's the reason why the United States left there. There were things like power sharing agreements, for example, between the Shia, the Sunnis, as well as the Kurds. You have things like affirmative action for Kurds, ladies and gentlemen, for social services, as well as even incentivizing interracial marriages, ladies and gentlemen, in order to quell those particular discrimination within that particular country. So we say, ladies and gentlemen, that 40% of the Iraqi population are comprised of the Kurds. Therefore, these 40% deserves to be represented. The question that we're going to ask them is, how then do you expect these 40% to be represented and how to administer the resources within Kurdistan, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to actively or structurally exclude them, ladies and gentlemen, because you don't want to seek for their particular consent? But let us assume that Iraq is absolutely evil. I'm so sure that you're going to buy that. But even if it's the case, it doesn't mean that the consent is no longer necessary, ladies and gentlemen, because we still think that the 40% should be represented. But let's take a look at Turkey, ladies and gentlemen, because they said that Turkey should be the only one, right? Well, we never said that Iraq should be the only one. We also said that Turkey should be part of it. But they said that Turkey is the only one which represents. Firstly, we say that that shouldn't be the case, because if we're going to compare representation, for example, of Kurds, there's at least no structural change inside of Turkey, ladies and gentlemen, unlike in Iraq, for example, where at least there is the change of power dynamics, and a supremacy of power is actually there to accommodate the Kurds, ladies and gentlemen. The same cultural sentiments, as well as symmetry of power in terms of representation, has been there, ladies and gentlemen, since the 1980s up until now, because there was no war to begin with, which changed and destroyed the structural powers there, unlike in Iraq, ladies and gentlemen. So if you're going to ask me who is the better representative, well, at least I think Iraq is the better representative. But this debate is not about who is better between these two countries, right? The debate is about why are you excluding Iraq to represent these people to begin with. The second reason why it shouldn't be Turkey alone is because according to the mighty almanac, 73%, ladies and gentlemen, the people living in Kurdistan are only the Kurdish people in Turkey are only 17%, right? Why is it that you want to hyper represent the 17% when the 40% living in Iraq are actually not as much represented? But the third reason why Turkey shouldn't be the only one. No, sus. I know you like me, but no, not just yet. The third reason is that, well, my first speaker also always said $10 billion were actually annually spent to quell Kurdish workers' parties against them, ladies and gentlemen. The death of Öcalan, for example, who is a key Kurdish figure, ladies and gentlemen, in the past has actually created that kind of emotional resonance amongst the Kurdish people that you cannot really trust Turkey. Even if this happened in the past, we do think, right, even if it happened in 1998, we do think that the resonance still is present up until now. That's the reason why you still have, a terrorist party to begin with. And the fact that they call the PKK a terrorist party means that you do not really also support the secession coming from this party. You do not consider it as a legitimate organization as well, ladies and gentlemen, members of the DCA. Then the only thing they said is that, well, Erdogan has finally won the minority hearts of the Kurdish people. Yeah, that is true to a certain extent, but there were riots after that, right? The majority of people hated you for doing that. So what is your guarantee that it will be stable, ladies and gentlemen, especially in the upcoming elections, Mr. Chair, where you have the majority against you? No, sit down. Second question is, does Iraq have a claim, Mr. Chair? Because if they do have the rights of sovereignty over this, therefore it should be able to, therefore its consent is necessary. Since World War I, Kurdistan has been administered by 5 states, something which my first speaker only glossed over. 43%, for example, of the old Kurdistan are under Turkey, 31% are under Iraq, and 18% of which are under Iraq. 31% are under Iran, and 18% is under Iraq, and 6% under Syria. Now, the operation of Turkey, therefore, given these particular division of administration, Mr. Chair, is only limited to 43%. The question is, why are you facilitating and utilizing or administering other parts of Turkey, ladies and gentlemen, which is not even under you, for example? Why are you utilizing 18% or 31% which belongs to countries like Iran and Iraq? Now, the reason why you cannot particularly facilitate these kinds of oil extraction is because oil extraction, refinery, as well as oil pipes are spread across Kurdistan, ladies and gentlemen, which are covers under the territories which are handled and administered by different parties. Therefore, in order for you to address and even facilitate a better exploitation, I think it's also, in a practical sense, better if you coordinate with these other countries. Lastly, how do we attain peace in a territorial conflict? But before that, okay, lastly, okay, sure.
We've given you reasons why Iraq has a perverse incentive to oppress the Kurds. Have you given us reasons why Turkey would want to oppress the Kurds?
Yes, we've given you reasons why Iraq's not going to do that because of the different structural change. We've also given you reasons why Turkey would still do that, given the fact that you still have terrorists there, you have the PKK, and given the fact there's no structural change, for example, within Turkey to accommodate the minorities, right? So how do we attain peace in territorial conflict? What we presented to you is that we said that negotiations is particularly important among all these 4 countries, ladies and gentlemen, in order for you to be able to reach a proper resolution. The response coming from the leader of the opposition is that, well, negotiation takes time. Well, yeah, negotiation really takes time, right? But what you're doing is that you're destroying a confidence-building measure, ladies and gentlemen, which is quite important for negotiation to work, ladies, because you're not seeking the consent of Iraq. So even if it doesn't work, for example, how with your policy, ladies and gentlemen, which completely destroys trust, resolve the problem in territorial conflict. But the next question is, will there even be a retaliation? The response coming from Amira here, who looks like me, is that, well, no, it's not going to happen because Iraq is a power broker. The United States is also a very powerful power broker, right? But it was attacked by terrorist organizations. It's true probably that Iraq wouldn't retaliate to you directly using conventional forces, but organizations like the PKK, for example, as well as terrorist groups who feel like you're looting away their resources, will be the one who will retaliate against you, respond against that, and I don't think, ladies and gentlemen, they were able to. Having said all of these things, we're looking at now at the semifinalists of this tournament. Thank you very much. I'm calm, just a moment.
I thank the government with and invite the opposition.
Let's put this into context for once. People of Kurdistan want to export oil. Turkish government decides to facilitate that process. The Iraqi government says, I do not consent. Somehow that means under government's model that the Iraqi government is very supportive of the Kurds and the Turkish are oppressing them and taking money away from them, even though they want to trade with Turkey. We don't think that makes any sense whatsoever, right? First, ladies and gentlemen, who is more likely to moderate and accommodate to Kurdish interests? Because what we must understand, ladies and gentlemen, as much as they argue about the arbitrary concepts of sovereignty, that's not going to give us any benefits for the Kurdish people who have been oppressed so much. So this debate is going to be decided on what side solves these problems best. First, who is much more likely to moderate? First of all, ladies and gentlemen, there was an engagement on whether or not Iraq has changed, right? We told you, however, that in spite of the fact that regime changes happened, this hasn't changed the fact that remnants of the Saddam regime has existed there. That means, ladies and gentlemen, individuals within government who also have a perverse incentive to continue to persecute Kurds exist within Iraq. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, they said, oh, but power sharing agreements exist and 40% of Iraq are Kurdish people. If that was true, Kurdish people would not have been a minority. But second, ladies and gentlemen, when we're talking about the power sharing agreement, yes, that happened. And you know what happened afterwards? People who were from the minority groups, ladies and gentlemen, were accused of corruption and kicked out, ladies and gentlemen, effectively meaning that Nouri al-Maliki was the only one standing, ladies and gentlemen, who was by default a Shia. We think that's what happens in Iraq. But we also told you, and this is the most crucial, right? Iraq, unlike Turkey, ladies and gentlemen, is a supremely ethnically divided conservative nation where it makes political sense to go ahead and oppress minorities. That means, ladies and gentlemen, you get votes by oppressing Kurds, as opposed to Turkey. Let's compare, right? Because they never gave you a solid reason why Turkey would actually go ahead and do it. We told you that in recent times, the new Turkey, ladies and gentlemen, number one, has created a peace deal with PKK, essentially meaning, ladies and gentlemen, they solve the problems of terrorism and as a benefit, ladies and gentlemen, they facilitate the oil exportation from Kurdistan. This means they have a natural incentive not to screw them over, because then all those problems would naturally come back. Second, ladies and gentlemen, Erdogan's political campaign is based on the fact that he created a peace deal with Kurdistan, ladies and gentlemen, meaning he has a natural incentive not to screw them over again. Third, ladies and gentlemen, there is a very big liberal population within Turkey, ladies and gentlemen, who go to nightclubs and stuff, unlike Iraq, who don't care whether or not you think Kurdish people are Muslims or not. They just want them protected. That means there's a natural incentive in Turkish politics to make sure you don't oppress them. Fourth, ladies and gentlemen, we said the president of Turkey is a Kurd. That's why they will not be persecuted, as opposed to Iraq, ladies and gentlemen, where the power sharing agreement didn't help at all. We think those are logical reasons as to why we have shown you why this won't happen, right? They said, oh, but Turkey doesn't support secession. Neither does Iraq. This debate is about who is more likely to be moderate, who is more likely to be able to facilitate those changes. But lastly, ladies and gentlemen, what we must understand is this is the reality they have to deal with. Regardless of what they do, ladies and gentlemen, joint venture isn't happening when Turkey doesn't facilitate oil export. What happens is no oil export happens from Kurdistan, ladies and gentlemen. No money goes back to that region. No empowerment of economic or social mobility happens to those people, naturally leaving them impoverished. That is a harm you have to deal with. Before I move on, go ahead.
Let's assume that Iran is evil, will beat up the Kurdish. You're still not answering why is it legitimate for Turkey to disrespect the sovereign claim of Iraq over oil within that? If we condemn China about it over Vietnam, what's with Turkey?
We think when you have systematically disenfranchised your people to an extent where you systematically persecute them in order to get votes, we think it's okay for us to breach your sovereignty. In just the same way, ladies and gentlemen, it's okay for us to breach the sovereignty in Kosovo in order to save people's lives. In just the same way, it's order for us to do so in Libya to save people's lives. We think that happens. That debate, ladies and gentlemen, cannot happen, right? Sovereignty it's a very easy argument to deal with. Moving on, right? How do we then necessarily, ladies and gentlemen, motivate Iraq to come, they said, oh, negotiation tables must happen, right? We told you already, why is it that negotiation is something that we're not like necessarily against? But we have tried it, and we have necessarily failed. And we think, ladies and gentlemen, as we have shown you, right? It's not like Turkey went, oh, I just want to piss off Iraq. Hey, I want to trade deal with you, even though government doesn't allow. They initially tried it. They went to Iraq, said, I want to be able to import oil from your country. But the Iraqi government didn't want to do so. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, we think joint ventures have been tried, have been failed. But furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, just because it's a negotiating table among two different countries doesn't make it necessarily better, because Iraq will continuously block any kind of empowerment possibilities of the Kurdish, ladies and gentlemen. And we have given you, by the way, logical reasons why Iraq will do it, logical reasons why Turkey won't do it. They have not given us any logical reason why Turkey will continue to suppress the Kurds, ladies and gentlemen. I have 6 levels of analysis still stands in that particular situation. Go ahead.
Sir, if you're saying that Iraq is supposed to not represent them, then the benefit of oil extraction from Turkey is only to the Turkish Kurds, right? What's the incentive to make Iraq then represent the Kurdish Iraq?
We disagree, because the entire Kurdistan, ladies and gentlemen, given the vast majority of it is within Iraq, and that's the portion, that's the government, ladies and gentlemen, that wants to export to Iraq. Obviously, export to Turkey. Obviously, Turkey has to give money to the Iraqi portion of Kurdistan as well. Otherwise, they wouldn't get the oil to begin with, right? Yeah. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, like the point at which, and this is something and lastly, right, they tried to push, oh, but now Iraq will retaliate against Turkey. We already preempted this on multiple levels, right? But we told you the most important facet of this is that Turkey, ladies and gentlemen, is a leader in the Islamic world. Essentially meaning, ladies and gentlemen, that the point at which Iraq tries to piss on Turkey means that this is something, ladies and gentlemen, that they might face alienation from other Muslim countries as well. This is why we think, ladies and gentlemen, it is not likely to happen that they're going to do it. But furthermore, we've given you one extra solid reason why they won't do it. Because we, ladies and gentlemen, are the only team that provides a sufficient reason why there is a possibility of the Iraqi government to stop oppressing the Kurdish minority. Because now their economic ties are attached, economic benefits are ties, they're economically tied to the Turkish government economy as well. That provides a solid disincentive for the Iraqi government from oppressing the Kurdish minority within its country as well. Because if you do so, ladies and gentlemen, you're also taking away some of Iraq's capability, and we think that is something at least we provide a disincentive for stopping them to do so. For all those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, and because like I really hate it when people lie in debates, I'm supremely proud to oppose.
It's so apparent that this team is lying if you look at basic mathematics. When they said that 40% of Iraqis are Kurds, while there are two other ethnicities over there, the Sunnis and the Shias. No matter how much you divide it, they will still stand in the minority. If you realize that that stats was used over and over again, it was quite obvious. There was MLNet which exists maybe in 2050. So first question, would Turkey oppress? So they gave us two reasons why Turkey oppressed. Only when we asked them, by the way. The first reason is because of terrorism. No substantiation, just said terrorism. We substantiated it in two ways. Number one, Turkey would have a disincentive to breach the peace deal which was brokered in 2013, which led towards the PKK to disarm and stop attacks made upon Turkey. That means Turkey will have an incentive to ensure they does not breach the terms of the contract to monopolize all the resources which was given. We think that's the first reason which we gave you. The second reason which we gave you is that Turkey has an incentive to ensure that the Kurds are taken care of, because desperation leads people to commit terrorist actions And the first target, ladies and gentlemen, is often Turkey because they're guilty through omission, but more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, because they're actor who just looked by and see people die. They counter that? No. Secondly, the second reason, again, just a one-liner, because the structures haven't evolved. How do you balance that? What do we tell you? We tell you, number one, that Turkey has a large Kurd voting bloc which has been supporting the AKP. Again, it's a factual debate there, right? Assuming that you don't believe this, let's go further. Everyone knows that Turkey is a liberal, globally connected country which must rely its ties upon the global community, in contrast to Iraq, which is oil-rich, ladies and gentlemen, which means that Turkey has a great incentive to not oppress, in contrast to Iraq. So we think that's something which I have yet to engage with. The second reason which we gave you is that where would refugees flock into? Iraq, a country which they themselves considered has oppressed systematically, or would they run to Turkey, a country which is richer, a country which has been hosting them for decades? Obviously, Turkey would not want to oppress the Kurds because oppressing them will bite them back in the ass. At times, it is literally. Conclusion here, ladies and gentlemen, we give you reasons why Turkey would not oppress. So let's answer the second question. Will the new Iraq oppress? Let's forget the historical injustices which were committed. We told you two things. One, the political unity structure which exists in Iraq allows rooms for exploitation, because in contrast to Turkey, in Iraq, it is politically popular to oppress minorities. That even the vice president, which was a Sunni, was ousted, ladies and gentlemen, because of false corruption standards. Because it is a country which is strife with civil disunity premised on ethnic lines, in contrast to Turkey, which does not have the same problem in this regard. Furthermore, we went further. Even if suddenly Iraq is suddenly a very nice country, what makes you think that the Kurds would want to cooperate with a country which has historically killed and wiped out more than 50,000 of its citizens in a period of 1 week, known by Chemical Ali? We think that itself is sufficient for us to win this point. On negotiation, we told you it's not that Turkey does not want to engage in Iraq, that Turkey has been systematically shut out from that negotiation process. I give you an argument in my speech that the way for us to bring an amicable end is for us to have a thread tied to that negotiation. That if Iraq does not negotiate, that means Turkey will circumvent Iraqi law, thus providing an impetus for Iraq to negotiate so that they'll get some part of the deal. We heard no response there. But finally, ladies and gentlemen, on sovereignty. Obviously, we respect your sovereign interests, but the point in which you suppress the people of your country, ladies and gentlemen, and that people of your country is directly tied to the Turkey ethnicity, it becomes a legitimate action. If suppression leads to an influx of refugees and increase in terrorist activities, it becomes a legitimate act. And on retaliation, the only response came in we gave you a myriad of reasons why Iraqi retaliation to Turkey will not happen. Status quo is peaceful. They have a burden to show why status quo has failed. They have failed to do so. We oppose.
I thank the opposite reply, and to conclude this quarterfinal, I invite the government.
Hello. Mr. Speaker, the birth of a nation has always been bloody, and the battle for representation has always been a long-term process, even at the expense of a resource as crucial and as monetarily powerful as oil. And the first reason why opposition is going to lose this debate very clearly is that all of their harms are based on the characterization that Iraq is a country of the devil. They tell you that they will never accept the Kurdish individuals. They will never represent them properly. Historically, we've oppressed them, and we've had two defenses coming from government bench. You're looking at Iraq post-Saddam. They needed to restructure. It's unfair for them to say that no democratic institutions exist and that we are on the verge of having Iraq that is more liberal, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, the world is looking at Iraq, and people have been undergoing democratic institutions. That's why when Vic said that 40% of Kurdish population live in Iraq, not 40% of Iraqi individuals in Iraq, we told you that you still have a sizable community living there. Even if it's 30%, 15%, 10%, the principle still remains the same. But they tell us, ladies and gentlemen, that Iraq is fundamentally different from Turkey. If your standard to say that they will never be properly represented is abuse, that's not what happened when you spent $10 billion to drive Kurdish individuals out of Turkey. That's not what happened when you ousted the PKK and obliterated them in the 1980s. That's not what happened when the Erdogan riots, you've had fourth generation Kurdish individuals telling you that you're not properly representing us. And even if you say they are properly representing them, the majority of your individuals are against the Kurdish individuals as well. That's always going to be a matter battle. So on both sides, I don't think that the right standard to use is representation, because we've both wronged Kurdistan. We are both in the process of properly representing and changing as a nation. Second of all, they tell us that they tell us about the argument. All of their arguments are tied to a moderate Turkey, right? But the benefit of extraction, which was surprisingly analyzed only under Mubarak, is analyzed in a vacuum. The Kurdish empowerment, the ability to vote, and all of these love for women will only happen if you analyze the benefit spread across the Kurdish population and the Kurdish individuals. But we ask them, empowerment to whom? Because the Turkey's facilitation of oil exports only benefits the Turkish Kurds. That's why we tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you still have Iraqi Kurds, you still have people inside Iran, and that's the question that they needed to answer today. That's why they even fall down on the nature of facilitation and extraction. You have to go back to the theme of the motion today. It's kaching. So you're doing it not for humanitarian reasons, but because you want to have an economic benefit. No argument coming from them that told us that the economic benefits will lead to the empowerment that they so want in today's debate. In fact, it's only coming from opposition government bench that we talked about refineries cutting across administrative functions that will disrespect sovereignty. You can't argue tolerance and respect and at the same time telling us that you're okay with displacing communities and making individuals.
And IIUM.